Welcome to the School Debate, What You Need to Know. My name is Teixeira, and I'm coming to you from the SMAC studios to dive into some of the most highly contested questions involving the new elementary school building here in Stoughton. Today with me, I have two very special guests, TJ Recupero and Pat Yanikoski. TJ has been the chairperson of the School Building Committee since its inception, and Pat is a member of the Elementary School Building Independent Working Group. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks
for
Megan.
having us.
We've got a lot to cover, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. First question's to you, TJ. Can you tell us, when did this project start? Can you speak to the opportunities that the community had to engage in this project? And then why was this design finally selected?
Sure. So in truth, it started back as far as 2010, probably even sooner than that when Pat was on the school committee, when we all recognized that the South School was beyond an economic repair, meaning that if we did any single repair, it would either trigger a bigger expense or it would be economically feasible to do that and repair the larger portion of the building. That was in 2010 when the town commissioned a town-wide facilities master plan. And we submitted a statement of interest to the MSBA, Mass School Building Authority back then. They looked at the South School and the high school. They decided that the high school was a bigger bang for the buck for the community and went with that project, although realized that the South School still was a priority school. It was actually in worse condition than the high school, believe it or not. That was in 2010, which is now, 13 years ago? That master plan was updated 4 times, 2013, 2017, 2021, and 23, I think, so 4 times. All of which said it was economically not feasible to repair the building. So we submitted an statement of interest, SOI, in 2020.
Wow.
MSBA accepted that. We had also submitted an SOI for the Wilkins School because that's actually our second oldest school. And MSBA stopped and said, well, wait, you have 2 schools, both a priority. Why don't you consider combining the 2 into one project? Because in truth, elementary school projects, the average elementary school project in Massachusetts these days is 620 students. And the South School had less than 300. Wilkins had less than 300. So they asked us to study both an individual South School project and a combined Wilkins project, which we did. We studied both. So that was beginning in 2021. When we started in 2021, and I'll wrap this up, I promise, first thing we did, and we looked at it, and we said, MSBA really isn't weighing our needs as much as our enrollment needs as much as we think they should. So we went back to MSBA, asked them to reevaluate, which would result in more money. They did. They increased what's called our design enrollment. That's the amount of money they give us per student for a school that we build. And then we actually started this project in spring of 2022. And studied both a single school replacement for the South and a combined school. And we looked at everything. And I can go into everything we looked at and why, but the basic point was this, is that we could today, given the inflation in school building, we could today pay for what amounts to an elementary school and a half we could pay for 2 elementary schools that we need by paying now about what it costs for 1.5 elementary schools. Whereas if we wait for the second one for another 5, 10 years, costs will escalate. We'll pay far more over the longer term.
Right.
I hope that.
A buy one, get one deal.
Kind of.
Buy one, get one half off.
Kind of, but that seems to trivialize the thought that went into the combined consolidated school. There was quite a bit of thought that went into it. So
great. Thank you. Pat, over to you. Can you tell us about the inception of the independent working group and how they went about organizing their work?
Sure, I'd be glad to. The working group was conceived by our town manager, Tom Calter, because he wanted to have a way to cut through the rumors, the misinformation, and also have us answer some questions that had been a gray area that we just didn't have answers to at the time. So the group was formed in August. Mr. Coulter involved residents, both on the yes and the no side. We ended up with 14 members signing the final document. A couple of people had to come and go because their personal situations changed. But we were charged with answering a set of questions put forth by Mr. Coulter, and we edited that. Your group posited some questions, and residents who were not involved in the working group asked some questions too. We took testimony every week for several months from everyone from the superintendent of schools to members of the building committee. Mr. Recupero was officially part of the working group, although he was
Passive.
a big passive, but a major resource,
Right.
I should say.
Right.
And our meetings were open to the public, with the exception of the last few, because our chairman, John Anzavino, wanted to focus those meetings on putting the document together.
Sure.
So, and we had great conversations with members of the public. We even invited both sides, if you will,
Right.
to a round table, which took up most of one of our meetings. Interestingly, a couple who lives in Precinct 8 came to one of the meetings and they said, we voted no, but we were just kind of heartbroken because we support the schools, but we just didn't know what was going to happen with the Wilkins. And the husband of that couple, Mark Rassicott, ended up becoming a member of the group.
Wow.
So
it really had a good community connection.
Yes, we learned a lot, and we hope they learned a lot, and we hope you will learn a lot.
Great. Thank you. TJ, the pinwheel design that the group ended up deciding on has been described as exorbitantly priced. And there are many concerns about the project relating to the location, the site work, the use of Fano Drive. Can you walk us through the costs associated and how you guys made this decision?
I sure can, and I wish there were an entire show on this, because this is, I think, where much of the, I want to say misinformation, but misunderstanding comes from, because it's easy to look at it and say, they like that. They like the pinwheel. As a matter of fact, I wish we didn't name it pinwheel, because that makes it sort of catchphrasey. But I'll tell you this, and this is the greatest myth of all. The idea that you can take any building design that you conceive in your head and make it a cheaper, better option for Stoughton is absolutely a myth, because it fails to consider all of the things that you put into a building. And what I mean by that is, picture in your mind, everybody watching can do this as well, picture in your mind a square, and now fit 15 classrooms in it. If you're just doing 300 students, the smaller school, if you wanted to do the larger school option, which we chose, you need to put 25 classrooms in it. But put 15 classrooms within that square. And then make sure that all of those classrooms are on an outside wall, because all classrooms need windows. Then make sure they're all a certain size, because there are size requirements for all classrooms. Eventually in that square, you can draw a random square. You run out of space in that square, you can move to another floor, or you can expand outwards for a bigger square. Either way, it starts costing more money. What the pinwheel does is it creates pods on each arm of a pinwheel to take advantage of outdoor lighting, It creates more outdoor wall space for windows, which are required to keep neighborhoods, because you can't put first graders next to fifth graders. And you have to group them all in certain, by classroom, we call them neighborhoods. You also need a gym that takes up the better part of one full floor. And you need a cafeteria, which takes up the better part of another whole floor. And you need learning commons, which takes up the better part of, or a large part of, either floor if you do 2, but a third floor if you do 3. So think of all those administrative offices, nursing station, counseling offices, everything that you think that you need to put into a school. Teachers' lounges, individual teaching space, a small auditorium space for students. So people criticize with the pinwheel, that grand stairway going up. That's actually seating for auditorium space. It makes every space of the pinwheel design utilized for the sake of reimbursement under MSBA's cost reimbursement scheme, grant scheme, I should say. So the idea that you can picture a simple square and make it cheaper is flawed. It costs no more to build the pinwheel than it does any other school design, and we studied 7. We studied 4 new school options, and by the way, one of them was rectangular.
Yep.
It's what's called the compact design, which we had to build up, and we had to build up 3 floors and compact everything in because of those rules for how you lay out classrooms. When you do all that, you find, and you price it out, and these aren't prices that we pull out of thin air. This isn't your brother-in-law saying that costs too much. These are authorized and approved cost estimators, 2 of them. Each come up with an independent estimate of what it will cost. Then they meet and they reconcile who was right and who was wrong. They come up with one estimated price, and of all the options that we studied, the pinwheel was the cheapest.
Wow. What about the site location? We hear a lot about the site location and things
locations.
that may or may not be included.
Right. Right. So that's actually the first step. You asked earlier about, when did this start and what was the process? The very first step in the process is to determine the site for a school, any school, high school. We did the same thing. We studied, in this case, 10 to 12 locations where you could put a school. We knew in this case that we needed one in this area of town because there are a couple thousand families in that south area of town that this school will service. So that's where we focused, but we weren't focused entirely on that because if we found a better location in town and there needed to be some adjustment of the district, we didn't preclude that option either. For example, we looked at an addition renovation of the Wilkins School, making it bigger and doing everything there. It wasn't cheaper. This parcel, it's about 30 acres plus or minus off of Park Street. A lot of people remember it as Line Lumber Road. I should look at the camera perhaps more than I look at you. We looked at this parcel on Line Lumber Road. It was acquired by the town in the early 1960s. Attached to that is a paper street. It's called Fano Drive. It's an old railroad bed, was acquired privately by a family in Stoughton, still own it, and they own adjacent land on the opposite side from where the school is going to go. There are some challenges with this site. There's some wetlands up near Park Street, and there's some wetlands out in the back. But there's a big, wide, probably 15 to 20 acre parcel in the middle that is prime location for a school. The problem is getting into it and getting out of it because, of course, you need both. And we looked at, like I said, about a dozen parcels where we could put a new school. We also looked at renovating the existing school, which we couldn't do for different reasons. There aren't a lot of spaces of town-owned property, about 15 acres we're looking for to build an average-sized school, any school, for all the things that you need to put on. Not a lot of options. We could buy private land. That adds to the cost, of course. So this was acquired in the early 1960s for school purposes. It says that right in the title documents. So it was always intended to be a school site. And we looked at, I've also been asked, I don't want to consume all the time from Pat because I tend to be worried, but there is a 15-acre parcel behind the existing South School. And there have been people who have asked fairly, by the way, because I asked this question also, but not everybody follows the meetings of the school building committee meeting to meeting. People will ask, why didn't you just put it there instead of where we did? We studied that. There's a utility, an electrical easement, mass electric easement, splits right down the middle. So it's not really a 15-acre parcel. It's really a 7 or 8 acre parcel, tops. There is another 8.5 acres where the existing South School is that we could, in theory, utilize. But the way the parcel is configured, that's a narrower area that expands to the larger 15-acre piece. You can't put one building on one section or the other. So it's not as big a parcel as you think. And the bigger point is that, aside from the utility easement, there's also a grade difference. From one end to the other, it's about 70 feet difference, spanning over, I want to say about 1,000 feet, but don't quote me on that. So that means we need to be putting a huge retaining wall in there to build a building. And to do that was just as much cost as we would do if we were building what is a bridge to cross the wetland area on Park Street to get into the current site. It was a trade-off for a better parcel on Park Street. That's why we chose that site.
Got it. Great, thank you. Pat, the independent working group did a lot of investigating into the alternative options that will come up if the vote fails. Can you speak to what the group learned about the alternative options here?
Yes, the most likely option if the vote fails is that we install modular classrooms at the other 4 elementary schools. Originally, it was supposed to be 3 of the elementary schools. Now, Dr. Baeta is saying 4. That is just a 10-year temporary fix. And despite that, the sites have to be prepared. You have to do architectural work. You have to worry about sewer, plumbing. In addition, those schools would be losing blacktop. They'd be losing parking spaces. They'd be losing playground spaces. And that's just not conducive to a full elementary school experience. And it increases overcrowding in those schools. For example, my granddaughter goes to the DAW, and it's in much better condition than the South, of course, but still, their library has been cut in half, and the other half is used for the technology learning. So all the schools are getting full, and plus, there are lunch hours that might have to be at 9:30 a.m.
Right.
because of the increase in the number of students. Other options, which are not good options either, are what's called a base repair, where you just take the existing building and you bring it up to code. Well, if you bring it up to code, that actually leaves you with less space, which we can't do. We can't do. The South School is bursting at the seams right now. The other option would be an addition renovation, which would be like a base repair plus an addition. That would be very expensive.
Right.
And you really don't get much bang for your buck.
Right.
The overcrowding still exists. You'd only be replacing the space that you lose when you bring the original building up to code. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are not really feasible options.
Right. And the time to do all that. Yeah, great. So TJ, some of the critics of this project suggest the solution is building a smaller school. If we started all the way over, what would be the process? How long would it take? And your best estimate on what it could cost?
Sure. So first of all, by smaller school, I think the number I generally hear is 300 students, right? Fine. Right now, at the end of last school year, I should say, because I haven't seen anything recently, but at the end of last school year, the South School closed out with 317 students. So that building is obsolete the day it opens. Now, school enrollment fluctuates for sure, but things like class size, certainly needs of the student today versus what they were when grown-ups advocate for smaller schools, because we had a different school that we went to. But needs are certainly different today. But, class size, that's a contract point. That's in the teacher's contract. Things like class size, there are also standards that we need to meet. And of course, there's a room size that we have to figure. But so building a smaller school is fine, but smaller school, we know what that costs too. We price that out. And the smaller school, even the square, the square-ish compact design, because you can't really build a square school. I defy someone to sketch it out on paper, because we did that. The compact design I mentioned. It's not cheaper. I mean, it is if you say we're going to build a 300-student school, but you also have to be honest with people, because the money you'd be saving today with a 300-student school, you'd be asking the students in that school to be paying for 15 years from now when you're going to need to do another school. So for the cost of, for most people, it will be $200, which I do not minimize. For most people, it will be about a $200 increase for this school. That school, as we know, MSBA school prices increase annually, and that's just a function of, year-to-year inflation. Over the last several years, inflation has been horrific around the world, of course, but if you look at our high school, for example, is the same exact size of a middle school in a town that's adjacent to us, same exact size in enrollment and in square footage, and the cost of their middle school today is twice, $250 million, twice
middle school.
What we paid for the high school in 2016. We're paying for it now, of course, but when we did the high school, it was $120 million, actually came in about $5 million under budget. But what they're estimating the cost for their middle school in this adjacent town, I won't name, is about $250 million. So at that rate, and it won't be that rate, because that was during a period of high inflation. Even if you get 5% inflation per year, which has been, you can go on MSBA. MSBA studies all of this. There's a wealth of information on their website. You can see that costs have escalated annually, and they spiked over the last 3 or 4 years, really. So cost per square footage of a building in 2020, for example, was about $417, I think it was. Today, in 2025, the cost per square footage is over $850. It's increased dramatically. Strike that. It was $832 in August. I'm just assuming that it increases in small steps. So call it $832 and call me a liar for the extra $28. So the smaller school is possible if you also accept that you will be doing another school sometime in the near future.
Yeah.
And we do have other priorities in town.
We do.
I will acknowledge. And so.
Great. Thank you. Pat, back to you. In reviewing the independent working group's main findings report, there were additional cost reductions that could be put towards this project moving forward. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Well, happily, the select board has agreed to take control from the school committee. That would require a school committee vote to take control of the South and the Jones School. Because the Jones School, the preschool at the Jones School will eventually be moved to the Wilkins, and so will the administrative offices. So when those buildings are sold by the select board, those proceeds will be used to offset the cost of the new school. There are also some significant energy savings. Dr. Baeta has said more than once that the Jones School costs as much or more in energy costs as Stoughton High School, which is, I almost didn't believe it when I heard it, but I believe it. And also, aren't there some rebates? Yeah.
Wow.
Rebates. Oh, $3 to $5 million in rebates.
Wow.
We don't know exact, but.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Great. Thank you. So very last question. What is your number one reason residents should vote yes on April 8th? We'll start with you, Pat.
I truly believe in my heart of hearts that this vote will determine the future of Stoughton. And I'm not trying to hyperbolize here. We are an attractive community right now, as evidenced by the number of families moving in and the enrollment in our schools. Who with children especially, would want to move here knowing that we rejected funding for a school and that their children might be in a modular classroom? Now, don't get me wrong, modular classrooms are not trailers. They are equipped with what students need, but they are not ideal classrooms. And I think we should care about who moves to this town. Do we want education-minded families who are going to support their children, get involved in the schools, and perhaps get involved in the town? Or do we want people moving here who say, well, you know, I can't afford Canton and I can't afford Easton. Well, okay, if my kid ends up in a modular, so be it. So I think this will determine our future.
Great. TJ?
Same question.
Same question.
I would say because this is the best solution to the town's problem, and it can't be done better. It can be done differently, but it can't be done better and cheaper. What I mean by that, and I know we're running short on time, so MSBA doesn't ask a building committee or a town or anybody to come forward with a plan for a new building. That's not what they do. You send a statement of interest that identifies a problem. They say, okay, we may give you money to solve that problem. Tell us how to solve it. That's called the feasibility study. So we study renovating. We study different sites. We study different building designs. We study different sizes, different enrollments. We study all these components. And this is what we came up with because this maximizes the amount of, we know objectively, this maximizes the amount of money that MSBA will give us in grants, $47 million. So if you want to come back and do this again, the average time, you asked this question earlier, to get back into the MSBA grant program, the average time is about 5 years. We've all looked at it. It's about 5 years. So if we wait 5 years, we take another 2 years for feasibility study and then another 2 years plus to build, you're looking at a new building in about 10 years, and you think of the escalation of costs over time. And I also think about this, and I'll end here, is that people don't consider the cost of, someone described this at one of our hearings as, you have a cost to repair your roof. Well, so property values have increased since we did the high school. I don't attribute those to the high school, but what if we didn't do a new high school and property values decreased because we had a crappy high school? And if you lost 5% of the value of your home and your home is worth $300,000, you all of a sudden lost, what, $15,000? And you can spend $200 this year and for the next 30-year loan. And over the next 10 years, if you spent that same amount of money doing a school now and maintaining what we have, the level of education we have, that's a better option for Stoughton. I will debate anyone who wants to come on SMAC or otherwise and debate me on these points or on any point of the project. Any objective point that we can debate back and forth, you can differ on the opinions that you look at when you look at the data. You can't debate the data, it's there. We can't do it better.
Well, that's a perfect point to end on. Thank you so much. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I think it really supported the facts around this very important project. I want to thank TJ and Pat for joining me today and having all the incredible amount of time and effort you've put into this project, not just for the children, but for the town as a whole. To everyone watching, as we wrap up our show, remember to stay informed, visiting voteyesstoughton.com. And most importantly, don't forget to pay less, vote yes on April 8th. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on The School Debate, What You Need to Know.